is worth more than the whole of Renaissance. In short, now I wish to go back to appreciate India and its worth. So she reached the country in December 1934, but did not immediately join her parents in Simla, but she stayed for a while in her ancestral home near Amritsar. One of her first acts was to take up the sari, which she wore for the rest of her life. It was also a symbolic act, since this is the period when Amrita began to develop a new aesthetic following her gradual exposure to the art of Ajanta and Ellora and Pahari, Rajput, and Mughal miniatures. While still in Amritsar, she made the painting Group of Three Girls, which depicts young women in unsettling reds and greens. The overview imposed on their bearing brings about a heightened awareness of their existence, where their flamboyant costume contrasts sharply with their melancholic expressions. Even though grouped together, each one appears isolated and self-enclosed. This sense of being alone in a crowd was to be a characteristic of Amrita's work during her stay in India. Back in the lofty surroundings of Simla, ensconced within the family home where she had a studio, the beauty and desolation of the hilly landscape struck her. As she wrote, it was the vision of a winter in India, desolate yet strangely beautiful, on endless tracts of luminous yellow-gray land, of dark-bodied, sad-faced, incredibly thin men and women who move silently, looking almost like silhouettes, and over which an indefinable melancholy reigns. It was different from the India, voluptuous, colorful, sunny, and superficial, the India so false to the tempting travel posters that I had expected to see. In winter that year, Amrita made two of her important paintings, Hill Women and Hill Men. The melancholy faces and thin bodies of the poor folk are transmuted to figures bearing an unutterable grace and dignity. The very dignity and grace of their bearing evokes a sympathetic chord in the viewer and a heightened awareness of their condition. Now, Amrita was feted and fawned in Simla, which was the summer capital of the British and the home of the royalty and the upper classes. But in the evening, she would return to her studio, put on her smock, and set to work. As she wrote to Jawaharlal Nehru, to whom she became quite close, my studio is quite bare, a huge room with whitewashed walls and only a couple of Chinese paintings, and the work of my friend, Marie-Louise Chassanet, of whom I have spoken to you. In addition to your Javanese cloth painting over the fireplace, a bookshelf, a divan, and a couple of armchairs to loll about in, and I, in my smock of blue cloth, the stuff that engine drivers wear, with my hair severely brushed back, when it is brushed, which is seldom, I don't present that delectably neat appearance you have in your short course of our acquaintance come to associate with me. So she's showing him her other side. This is Amrita with Nehru, as we know, and in the background is her husband, Victor Egan. She was quite close to him, and it is speculated that she was even intimately involved with him. But it was in Simla that Amrita also met Malcolm Muggeridge, the acerbic correspondent of the Statesman, whose critical writings made him unpopular with his editor and also the Viceroy, Lord Wellington. She had a raging affair with him, and among the things he was to write was the fact that she's very sensual and made up, was wearing an exquisite silver and black sari, is rather self-consciously arty, has studied art in Paris, paints. The attraction of two people at odds with the establishment to each other was inevitable, and Amrita was to paint him in the same critical manner. We see a strong, somewhat edgy person with a disproportionately large, outstretched hand. The mobile, shifting, attractive face creates an unsettling effect of strangeness precisely because it defies preconceived notions. Malcolm left Shimla soon after, in September 1935, for a job with the Evening Standard in London, but he was to write profusely about her in his books in a very intense and ironic manner. For instance, he wrote, "Amrita had her studio and I sat for her, or rather lolled on a sofa, sometimes reading or just watching with fascination the animal intensity of her concentration, making her short of breath with beads of sweat appearing on her upper lip. It was this animality which she somehow transferred to the colors as she mixed them and splashed them on her canvas." So this is Amrita painting him with an anxious father watching in the background. He was 10 years older than her, and he was married, and naturally was, of course, concerned to her parents. Amrita was to step outside the sheltered realms of her existence when she decided to make a trip to the south. And this actually was a path-breaking trip for her, because it is in the south that she created her iconic masterly works. And as we see, here's one of them, The Bride's Toilet. On her way, she stopped in Bombay, where she was captivated by the miniatures in the Karl Khandalawala collection. He was also to become a close friend. The works that came out of her southern trip were to mark a watershed. She was spellbound by the cave paintings and sculptures at Ajanta and Ellora. The sonorous rhythms of Ajanta, undulating figures that seemed to rise from the deeply hewn caves, and the subtle and brilliant hues sent her reeling on a sensuous journey. She attempted to translate into her paintings the plasticity, the color juxtapositioning, and the classical poise of the forms. The molded rhythms of Ajanta begin to be assimilated in a painting like The Bride's Toilet, which actually she made on her return to Shimla. Now, the subject has been devised by the courtly miniature traditions that were often used to enhance eroticism, with the woman adorning herself and also being observed by the lover hiding behind a bush. But in Amrita's painting, the fair-skinned and obviously upper-caste woman turns towards the viewer to reveal her desolation. Her hennaed hands, suggesting fertility, only serve to contrast with her distress. The earlier immobility gives way to rhythmic gestures of ritual activity. Amrita is moving towards surer ground with her painting The Brahmacharis, where a group of young Brahmin boys wearing their sacred thread and white dhotis create an impression of both nobility and vulnerability. The confident handling of the figures and the juxtaposition of dark and light masses create an exceptional work of male beauty. The modulation of white against subtly nuanced amber red makes it a stunning exposition of color. The cavernous deep background mimics the caves, providing the layered format for the rhythmic stances of the figures. The Brahmacharis is indeed a masterpiece, perfectly poised between the serenity of ritual tradition and the turbulence of diversity. In monumentalizing the everyday, the ordinary, Amrita reaches her apogee with the South Indian villages going to the market. Here, for the first time, we have a suggestion of undulating body movement in time. With their burnt sienna bodies and their brilliant clothes, the figures appear to have stepped down from the Ajanta cave walls to go about their everyday affairs. Now, an intriguing duality existed in Amrita's methods, where she depended heavily on the academic realist method of having models pose for her while aspiring towards modernism. This sometimes went to absurd lengths, where she had a sick boy pose as a South Indian brahmachari, or a Pahari servant woman dresses in bright clothes to be part of the tableau of bride's toilet. Yet she was moving towards increasing simplification in form. In June 1938, Amrita returned to Hungary to marry her first cousin, Victor Egan, despite the disapproval of the parents. During this period, she made a marvelous composition where extreme simplicity of form is modulated by tones of white and brown. Two Girls. This is also my favorite painting. We see that it seems to be a very simple work, very frontal, and yet it's a very secret painting, and it's full of complexities. The young women are startling in their bold frontality, but secretive at the same time. The physical and emotional longing for the women, for one another, has many connotations: personal, social, racial. It is also the embodiment of two aspects of Amrita's own personality, the West and the East. It's a painting overloaded with significance. In many ways, Amrita was in a position of being an insider and an outsider. She was able to catch the quick of a subject's personality while retaining a distance, intuitively aware of the deeply sensuous rhythms of women's lives. She also empathized with the frustrations of their truncated selves. The Bride. The painting of the bride is of a woman dressed in resplendent clothes that contrast with her expression of deep foreboding. After her marriage in Budapest, Amrita returned to India and spent a considerable period at the family estate in Saraya in Uttar Pradesh, where her doctor husband ran a clinic. She had an opportunity to watch village women go about their daily routine and to apprehend the rhythms of their lives. She was also able to observe women's ennui and longing within the four walls of their cloistered existence, their feudal seclusion, and the pastimes they devised to while away their hours. In Woman Resting on a Charpoy, she reflects the sequestered feminine world, which was her domain, and became the rich crown to represent the female body that was layered with meaning. The plunging view of the woman lying on a bed, one hand thrown back, her legs in a position of abandon, expresses all the lassitude of her existence, which contrasts with her bright clothes. The red suffuses, indeed suffocates the image in both eroticized expectation and truncated frustration. While her figures are often transfixed in the moment, the colors are always in vibrant movement.